Hey, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you had a fantastic Thanksgiving, and I definitely had a good one. We flew out to California. I think I mentioned last week, and we just made the plane before we got a huge blizzard and snowstorm here in Denver. So I imagine that most of you are under some sort of winter warning or watch or feats of or various feet of snow and or something. So I know a lot of people were affected by storms that went through over the holidays. So anyways, I'm back. We got back this weekend and definitely in the thick of things again. I wanted to talk a little bit about the assignment last week. I was actually collectively pretty pleased with the level of analysis that was incorporated in the assignment. I think a lot of you definitely demonstrated an understanding of kind of how this concept of legal analysis works. And so I encouraged, I think most, if not all of you in my feedback, to incorporate that same level of analysis in the legal component section of the Ituraldi case assignment as you work towards the final draft. So what this means is, incorporate that IRAC method of analysis. What is the issue? What is the rule for each element, not for negligence, for each element. So remember the 4Ds that most of you articulated very well in your assignment. So the 4Ds, the rule, and then apply specific facts, and then come out with your conclusion. And again, I just as a point of emphasis, I think the greatest value, in my opinion, of course it'll be different for everybody. In my opinion, the greatest value that you would take from this class is this whole concept of thinking about issues like this critically, thinking about them analytically in terms of what is the rule, apply specific facts that are known to you, and then come out with your conclusion. So I'm more concerned about the process. So, what is the process of analysis as opposed to the actual conclusion, which I think, again, if your analysis is reasonable, that's going to lead to a reasonable conclusion, and that's what really matters. So great work on that. Just keep trudging forward on that analysis. And again, please reach out if you have any questions. I will definitely be happy to answer them or to talk through anything with you. So we're getting into remember the first week of class, I talked a little bit about how this class was broken up. And it's really broken up into two different sections. You've got the legal component section, you've got the ethics component section. So we're the last few weeks here, we're diving into the ethics piece. And so the question that I'm sure is at the forefront of your mind is, how do we incorporate this legal analysis into an ethics issue? So how do we analyze ethics issues? There's really no rule in terms of ethics, right? So it's that kind of makes it difficult. And while there's no rule, which makes it obviously a different issue than what you're dealing with on the legal side, because you've got specific rules. You've got like, for example, the first element of a negligence case is duty. So when is a duty formed? It's when that physician-patient relationship is established. That's the rule. So with ethics, you don't really have a rule, but you do have principles and theories. And remember, if you harken back to week one, we had that assignment where we discussed a variety of ethical theories and principles. And so that will be sort of what you are applying here as we move forward with the ethics component. So, you apply these theories, apply these principles, and apply specific facts from the case to principles and theories. I think that would be really great. So it's a little bit different, but still sort of the same process, applying facts to principles and theories, coming out with your conclusion with respect to the ethical side of things. So Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about your reading. This isn't in obviously any of the assignments, but it is in, I think, Chapter 11, Appendix A, somewhere in there, of your reading of your text with respect to clinical trials. So, clinical trials, one step of the drug development process. It's really highly regulated by the FDA. If you have ever taken part in a clinical trial, if you've ever been on the healthcare provider side of a clinical trial, then you're very familiar with probably with how regulated those studies are. So I've done a handful of investigations for clients that we're the provider, the healthcare provider in a clinical study, and the question's always with respect to the propriety of how the study was administered, whether the process was followed, the regulations were followed. And the big thing to remember with clinical trials, and is always seems to be the heart of any of these investigations, is whether proper informed consent was given. So that's super important. If you are involved in any way in clinical studies, then you I'm sure would agree with that it seems to be the heart of a lot of these issues, and certainly is very important from a regulatory standpoint, from a guideline standpoint. Proper informed consent has to be received in order to comply with the necessary rules and regulations of clinical trials. So things like FDA rules, ICH guidelines, IRB rules, all that, the informed consent documents, the marketing, which informed consent really starts with the marketing of these clinical studies. That all has to be approved by the IRB, which is the governing board over any sort of clinical study. Certainly, there's serious ethical issues regarding clinical research, potentially, which is why full informed consent is really, really critical. So that's all I have. There's a website, and I find it fascinating. Of course, I'm a nerd, so it probably makes sense for me to find that fascinating. But there's a website with information on the whole drug development process, and I'm going to post it on the announcement. So feel free to just check it out. It's on the FDA website, but it's sort of an interesting high level look at the whole process of developing drugs and getting them to the public for public use and consumption. So. Okay, so let's talk about ethics just for a brief moment. I don't have a lot to say here, and I know I say that every week, and I end up taking too much time. So, ethics, as we get into this topic, it's sort of a tough topic to consider, to cover, because it's so individualized. The way I view ethics, you can really break it down into two separate and distinct components. There's really this component of societal ethics, certain ethical values that we as a society collectively agree are not ethical. And as a result, we have constructed as a society rules to prohibit such behavior. Things like murdering people or stealing things, or a variety of other things that we believe that's not ethical behavior, and so we've formulated laws that prohibit that sort of behavior. And then there are individual ethics. So the second component, I think, are more individual, based on our personal beliefs, based on our environment, our faith, how we were raised, sort of the ideas that we formulated as we've grown into adulthood. Things like life support, abortion, euthanasia, healthcare, the delivery of healthcare, whether it's a right or entitlement or not, and even harken back to that scenario from, I think it was week 1 or 2, on rationing of healthcare, right? So if you have 1,000 people, you have 100 flu vaccines, what are the ethics behind who gets those vaccines. So there are different principles and theories that, and if you think back to the assignment before that you were required to sort of analyze through, but some of that's going to be informed by your own personal ethics, right? So, how do you ration healthcare? If you have a limited supply, maybe your personal ethics say that, hey, it's first come, first serve. Where it's everyone has just as much right to the vaccine as everyone else, or maybe your personal ethics say no, we need to give it to the elderly and the most vulnerable parts of society, or maybe your ethics say no, we need to give it to those that will that provide the most value to society, right? So maybe our law enforcement officials or firefighters or government officials. I don't know. So there are different ways to look at it, and I think it's just some of it's informed by our own personal ethics. Euthanasia is one that we're going to get into in this class. Is an interesting one, and it's been in the news probably in the last not so much anymore, but certainly the last 5-10 years, it has been. Oregon is one of the few states that has what they call a Death with Dignity Act that allows terminally ill patients to receive some sort of prescription of lethal medications, which they administer themselves. And so, Colorado, I think a year, maybe it's been 2 years. It's been a year or two. They passed a very similar law, and there are certain pretty tight controls and restrictions around that. Certainly with sort of the I don't know, escape clause isn't the right term, but some sort of provision that allows a healthcare provider to sort of recuse himself or herself from doing that. And so they're all. I mean, it's very kind of a hotly debated topic, and it probably will become more so as this sort of legislation proliferates among other states. So, these are all things to think about and consider as you think through your ethical values. For our purposes, ethical values in the healthcare environment. The next couple of discussion questions are really ethics centric and get into some pretty, I'd say, controversial topics, which is good. I mean, and again, I think I said at the beginning of this class, we're going to get into this stuff. We all have opinions, and I think it's great. Please post your opinions, but also please be mindful that everyone has a right to their opinion, and we should be respectful of that. So that's really important, especially as we get into some of these topics that I think implicate or at least evoke certain personal emotions. So anyways, that's all I have for this week. If you have any questions, please let me know. Please feel free to reach out. And good luck on week 6. Talk to you later. Bye.